Hi, my name is Marisol Reed, and last Saturday, at the 35th anniversary celebration of my family's company, Reed and Company, I was seated next to the fire exit, not just near it, right next to the bright red push-bar door with a flickering exit sign above it, buzzing like it too was trying to leave. On the white linen table before me sat a name tag. Not Marisol, not Ms. Reed, just 3 words printed in block serif font, The Outsider. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I didn't even touch the tag. I simply took my seat and folded my napkin into a triangle like I always do. My lipstick didn't smudge. My smile didn't falter. But my hands trembled under the tablecloth. Ever been erased while still breathing? Before we dive in, tell me, what would your name tag have said if your family had written it for you? Drop it in the comments. Let's talk. They say the company started with a dream. Reed and Company, an old-school independent bookstore chain turned cultural hub across Seattle, the kind of place with wooden shelves and coffee-stained poetry readings, a place that used to matter. My father, Robert Reed, built it out of his garage with nothing but first editions, espresso beans, and ambition. At least, that's the version they print in the newsletters. The truth? The version no one ever reads aloud? He built it twice. Once with passion, once with my money. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. That night, I arrived early. Black dress, classic pearls, low heels, simple but sharp. I'd kept the makeup minimal and my hair pinned up, just the way he used to say looked professional, not overpowering. I didn't bring a date, didn't bring a press pass, didn't bring my resume, though maybe I should have taped one to my chair. The valet smiled and took my keys without recognition. I half wanted to say, "There's a copy of the New York Times in the trunk with my name in it. Check the byline." But what would be the point? Nobody here reads the fine print. The banner draped across the venue entrance read, Reed and Company. 35 years of stories, gold cursive on a navy backdrop. So pristine it looked like a wedding. So glossy it didn't feel like family. A hostess with perfect teeth scanned her iPad, paused at my name, then blinked. "Right this way, Ms. Reed?" I nodded. There was that flicker again. That micro-expression that says, "Oh, you're the one they don't talk about." She weaved through small clusters of guests, the usual blend of business partners, distant cousins, and Instagram entrepreneurs posing with champagne. She stopped at a table tucked against the back wall, not just near the edge, against it. The emergency exit practically brushed the chairs, and there it was, The Outsider. No title, no surname, just a label. I stared at it. Then I sat. I didn't ask who printed it. I didn't need to. Tessa had her fingerprints all over it. My half-sister, golden child, keynote speaker, and, if you believe the brand brochures, visionary architect of the Reed Renaissance. Tessa, who hadn't returned a single call when Dad was in the ER. Tessa, who posted filtered quotes about family unity while I negotiated bank extensions behind closed doors. She was front and center tonight, of course, dressed like champagne, smile like packaging, the kind of woman who glowed under chandeliers. I glanced across the room. She was posing for a photo beside the original Reed and Company storefront plaque. A photographer crouched to get the best angle, and someone handed her a copy of the new company memoir. Her name was in bold on the inside cover. Mine wasn't in the index. I looked back at the table. The cutlery was polished, the menu card embossed, and the outsider, was seated next to a half-wilted flower arrangement that smelled like apology. A distant aunt approached with a wine glass in hand. "Marisol, didn't see you there, still living in, where was it, Chicago?" "Portland." Right. Such a shame you couldn't make it last year. We had the loveliest tribute video. Tessa sang. I smiled. Oh, I'm sure it was unforgettable. She blinked, uncertain if it was sarcasm. It was. A few seats down, 2 of my cousins scrolled through their phones. One of them looked up briefly. "Didn't think you'd actually come," he muttered. I said nothing. What was there to say? They thought I'd stayed away out of pride. They didn't know I stayed away because I was tired of financing the facade. 4 years ago, Reed and Company had been weeks away from collapse. The rent was overdue, the suppliers unpaid, the flagship store on 3rd and Main about to be repossessed. I just closed a consulting contract in Singapore and wired $475,000 into a private rescue fund. No fanfare, no public thanks. Dad called it a lifeline. Tessa called it complicating the brand story. So they erased it, erased me. No headlines, no photos, no plaque, just a spot by the fire exit and a name tag that whispered, "You don't belong here." But I stayed, because this time I wasn't here for their approval. I glanced down at my clutch, opened it, and ran my fingers over the envelope inside. Not a threat, not even a statement, just receipts. Tonight they toasted the company like it had built itself. Tomorrow they'd remember who signed the deed to the building they were standing in, because family might forget, but contracts don't. The champagne flutes clinked somewhere near the front of the room, but back where I sat, the music sounded distant, like it belonged to another party, one I had never been invited to. Across the room, the projector lit up. A glossy montage began to play, old photos of Reed and Company through the decades, shelves of books, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, typewriters, book clubs, press clippings. The crowd murmured with nostalgia. Then came the newer footage, Dad shaking hands with investors, Tessa standing with local news anchors, B-roll of her pointing at a floor plan with a pencil like she'd just redesigned the Library of Congress. Narration began. A voiceover, female, polished, probably paid, delivered the script with the warmth of a documentary. Reed and Company has endured through decades of economic change, cultural shifts, and the digital age, but its heart never wavered. I knew that line. I wrote it. 3 years ago, in a brand strategy memo I drafted during a 4 a.m. flight layover in Reykjavik. Of course, no credit line followed. No written by Marisol Reed, not even contributor. The script continued. Thanks to the innovative leadership of Tessa Reed, the company found its way back into the hearts of readers, one shelf at a time. Applause broke out. I stayed seated. I stayed silent. But inside me, something burned. Not anger, not jealousy. Truth. Truth rubbing up against glass, waiting to shatter the illusion. They didn't print the email from Dad dated June 17th, 2020. Mari? Sweetheart? The lease on 3rd and Main is at risk. If we lose that location, the others will fold like dominoes. I need your help. Just this once. I'll make it right. They didn't print my response. Understood. Sending full wire by noon. No need to loop Tessa. Keep it quiet. I'll deal with the paperwork. They didn't print the memo from our CFO thanking me for covering a 6-month vendor backlog. They didn't print the signed temporary power of attorney that gave me authority to negotiate with the city council for a zoning extension. They didn't print the deed to the building we were currently standing in, the very space now transformed into a glittering event hall that still listed me as primary stakeholder. They forgot to print a lot of things, but I hadn't. I leaned back in my chair and opened the envelope in my clutch. Inside were 2 documents. One was the wire transfer confirmation, $475,000 from my private holdings to Reed & Co.'s business rescue fund. The other, a scanned copy of the silent partnership agreement I signed with Dad, dated, notarized, ironclad. Under the terms of that agreement, I held 61% of ownership of the flagship location. It included rights to branding decisions, merchandising, lease negotiations, and event use approvals, which meant I had signed off on this very celebration. I had approved the budget, the caterer, the chairs they were sitting in, the playlist. I'd even selected the linen color because Tessa was too busy filming her book haul video with Good Morning Seattle. But none of that was part of the official story. Not in the printed program, not in the speech, not in the scripted video they just applauded for. I didn't need to be center stage, but I was tired of being edited out entirely. A hand suddenly landed on my shoulder. I turned to find Aunt Vanessa, Mom's youngest sister, the only one who ever really saw through the show. She smiled, soft but tight-lipped. "Still got that spine of yours, huh?" I gave a slight shrug. Didn't know I needed armor just to sit at my own family's table. Vanessa sat beside me without asking. Her eyes wandered toward the stage where Dad was now hugging Tessa after the video ended. The crowd was on its feet. "They've rewritten the history so many times," she said. "I'm not sure they remember what actually happened." "Doesn't matter if they remember," I said quietly. "I've got documents." She smirked, reached into her handbag, and pulled out the folded event program. "Have you seen this yet?" I nodded. Page 4. Company Visionaries. Guess who's not on it? She didn't laugh, just sighed. "It's a beautiful company," she said after a pause, "but it's built on your silence." I stared down at the empty dessert plate in front of me. The silver fork beside it gleamed under the chandeliers like a dagger polished for show. I think," I said slowly, "I'm done being silent." Across the ballroom, Tessa picked up a microphone. Her voice rang out, syrupy and scripted. And now, a toast to the future of Reed & Co., to the next 35 years of stories, shelves, and sisterhood. The word hung in the air, sisterhood. She smiled in my direction for the first time all night, polite, controlled, like she was daring me to smile back. I didn't. She raised her glass. So did the crowd, even my father. I stayed seated, my hands folded in my lap, my glass untouched. I wasn't boycotting the toast. I was observing the performance, every note, every smirk, every omission. Because when you know the truth, you don't need to yell it. You just wait for the moment it has to be heard. In the folder on my phone titled Legacy Records, I tapped a subfolder marked Receipts Confirmed. Inside, PDF scans, audio memos, signed faxes, property tax statements, a paper trail no one could bury. For years, they'd toasted around me. Tonight, they toasted without me. But next time? Next time, they'd be toasting because of me. And they'd know it. I didn't leave the ballroom when the music started. I stayed. Not to dance, not to mingle, but to watch. Because watching is a form of remembering, and remembering, in my family, is how you survive. The DJ transitioned from piano jazz to some top 40 remix, the kind that made old donors sway awkwardly near the dessert bar. The lighting dimmed to a moody amber, and the servers began to circulate with refilled glasses of Prosecco and trays of tiny cakes nobody asked for. Across the room, Tessa stood near the publisher's table, laughing into someone's shoulder. Her sequin dress shimmered like success, like branding, like strategy. She was so good at this. The game, the image, the show. And I was good at everything she wasn't. Contracts, funding, logistics, crisis control. I was the quiet scaffolding behind the stage she danced on. For a long time, I thought that was enough. Until tonight. I stepped away from the table, heels clicking softly on the hardwood, and slipped out the side door to the hallway marked Staff Only. Down the corridor, past the kitchen's echoing hum, I stopped outside the coat check and pulled out my phone. One tap, then another. Gmail, drafts. 2, board@readandco.com. Subject, ownership confirmation and brand oversight. Notice no drama, no emotion, just facts. Just the truth, wrapped in professionalism and sent with surgical precision. Attached were my signed silent partnership agreement with Robert Reed, the current deed of the flagship building, this building, confirmation of my 61% stake, including operational approval authority, screenshots of event plans I had reviewed and signed, my legal counsel's contact info. I reread the message twice, checked every attachment, then hit send. No fanfare, just click. A single precise sound that meant everything had already changed. 10 minutes later, back in the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted. Not for everyone, just for those who knew how to read the air. Tessa's posture stiffened subtly, like a dancer catching a missed cue. She was scrolling her phone now, barely pretending to listen to whoever was gushing beside her. My father, Robert Reed, looked across the room and met my eyes for the first time all evening. He knew, not the full extent, but enough. Enough to realize something had shifted out of his control. He raised his glass slightly, not in toast, more in truce. I didn't return the gesture, because it wasn't time for peace yet. I returned to my table, calm, steady. Aunt Vanessa was still seated beside me, now sipping something dark and neat. She raised an eyebrow. "You okay?" I nodded. "Better than okay." She chuckled. That kind of smile usually follows a fire. I turned my water glass slowly by its stem. "No fire," I said, "just the first crack in the mirror." And then the email replies started. First, from David Lamont, head of retail expansion. Received and acknowledged. I'll be in touch Monday morning. Then Claire Morgan, CFO. This clarifies several questions from the last quarter's audit. Thank you. And finally, my favorite, Marla Torres, Brand VP, Marisol. Didn't realize you were still actively involved. Let's set up a time to realign next week. I smiled. Still involved? I own the building you're standing in. Still involved. That's rich. By the time the party began to wind down, I'd received 7 confirmations, 3 thank you responses, and 1 red receipt from Tessa's assistant, forwarded to her private email. Perfect. It wasn't revenge, it was restoration. And I wasn't done. I exited quietly. Again. No goodbyes, no last-minute speeches. I walked out like I walked in, unnoticed by the ones who never saw me to begin with. Back at my hotel suite, I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I opened my laptop, logged into my secure business drive, navigated to the folder marked Legacy Strategic Holdings, Reed & Company, Contingency Plan. Inside were timeline documents, statement drafts, media protocols, legal pathways, internal talking points, and 1 special file, Launch Strategy, version C, in case of public erasure. This wasn't an act of spite. It was a blueprint I had quietly built over 3 years of being invisible. They'd pretended I wasn't part of the story, so now I was writing a new one, where I held the pen. The next morning, the first text came from my cousin Joey. "What was that email last night? You're part of the ownership team?" I didn't answer. Then from Lisa, Tessa's longtime assistant, "Heads up, she's furious," said, "You're hijacking her moment." That made me smile, because it was never her moment to begin with. She just narrated it louder. Then came the call. Robert Reed, Dad. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Marisol," he said, voice already laced with strain. "We need to talk." "About the building?" I asked flatly. He exhaled. "About all of it. This wasn't the time or place to assert anything." "Actually," I replied, tone steady, "it was exactly the time. You were celebrating 35 years of work I helped save." He went quiet. "I never wanted to erase you," he said finally. "But you did," I said. "Repeatedly, publicly, legally, you couldn't. But emotionally, you did." Another pause. "This could fracture things." "It already did," I said. "You just didn't notice." He didn't try to argue, because he knew I was right. After the call, I sat by the window with a black coffee and stared out at the Seattle skyline. The city looked different now. Not brighter, not harsher, just clearer. I pulled my phone back out, opened Instagram. Tessa had posted a photo from the event. She was standing beneath the Reed & Company logo. Caption, "So proud to honor the legacy of our family business. 35 years and just getting started." The comments gushed. "So proud of you. A true visionary. You're the future." I didn't comment. Didn't DM. didn't even like the post, because I had already sent the only message that mattered, and it was signed. Not shouted, not posted, just signed. Marisol Reed Majority Stakeholder Sunday Brunch at the Reed House was always a tradition wrapped in pretense. It wasn't about the food, though the food was always immaculate. It wasn't about the company, though the room was always filled with curated smiles. No, brunch was about appearances, a place to present the family as functional, beautiful, whole, even when it wasn't. And this morning, it certainly wasn't. The house was filled with the scent of rosemary potatoes and lavender candles, a contradiction that somehow worked. Crystal glasses lined the long oak table. Fresh flowers, sunflowers this time, smiled from the center like nothing had happened. But something had, and no amount of citrus glaze or mimosas could hide it. I arrived last, not out of disrespect, out of calculation. Let them settle. Let the chatter bubble. Let the nerves stew just enough to be felt. As I stepped into the dining room, conversation dipped. Not stopped entirely, just faltered. A subtle, collective inhale. Heads turned, then turned away too quickly. The kind of silence you taste before it's spoken. I walked the length of the table in silence, heels clicking gently on the tile floor. I wasn't overdressed, but I was precise. Navy blouse, pearl studs, hair tied back. Understated power. The look of someone who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. I took the seat at the end of the table. The head. A few eyes widened. A fork clinked against porcelain. No one said a word. Across from me sat Tessa, arms crossed loosely, lips pressed together in a smile so tight it could cut glass. To her right, Dad. He looked older this morning, not in years, just in weight, like he knew something had shifted and it wouldn't shift back. "Good morning," I said, unfolding my napkin, polite, crisp, irrefutable. Vanessa, seated near the middle, gave me a subtle nod. One ally was all I needed. The housekeeper brought out the first course, quiche and fruit, plated like something out of a lifestyle blog. Everyone began eating as though nothing was wrong, but something was. I let them chew, sip, pretend. Then, midway through a conversation about gala donations, I cleared my throat. "Before we get too deep into the brunch spread," I said, "I'd like to take a moment." All eyes turned. Even the forks paused mid-air. I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of crisp ivory envelopes, one for each adult at the table. I began passing them hand over hand like communion. Dad looked at his. Tessa stared at hers like it was a threat wrapped in cardstock. "These," I said calmly, "are copies of the ownership documents I shared with the board last night. You may want to take a look before the week starts." No one moved, so I continued. "As many of you know, or didn't, I've held majority interest in Reed & Company's flagship property for 3 years. Effective Monday, per our restructuring agreement, I'll also be assuming operational oversight for legacy brand assets." Dad opened his envelope. Tessa didn't. "What does that mean?" asked Joey, the cousin who still thought TikTok followers were equity. "It means," I said, "that I now oversee how the company's name is used, publicly, legally, financially." "But," Tessa began, then stopped herself. I looked at her. "Yes?" Her voice was sharper now. "You're hijacking everything. You waited until the night of the gala to blindside us?" "I didn't hijack anything," I replied evenly. "I simply stopped erasing myself." Dad set down his envelope and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Marisol," he began, "I understand you're upset, but we need unity right now, publicly at least." "Unity built on a mission isn't unity," I said. "It's theater." I turned to the rest of the table. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to clarify. For years, I supported Reed & Company financially, logistically, and strategically. Without name recognition, without credit, without complaint. I asked for none of this celebration. But I will no longer sit quietly while a false version of the company's history is marketed as truth. The table was silent, even the forks. Tessa stood. This is absurd. You were never interested in the brand until it was convenient. I raised an eyebrow. You mean until I saved it? Her face flushed. You didn't build this company, she spat. No, I said, but I bought it when it was about to collapse. That matters. Ownership matters. Dad stood then too. Sit down, he said to her gently but firmly. She hesitated. He repeated, Tessa. Sit. She sat, and in that moment I saw it. Not just surrender, but realization. For the first time, she understood that charisma alone couldn't cancel contracts. I turned back to the rest of the table. This doesn't mean the end of your roles, I said. I'm not removing anyone, but I am restructuring how the brand moves forward, truthfully, transparently. And what if we don't agree? Asked an uncle I barely knew. Then you'll need to bring legal counsel, I said, and your documents. I smiled slightly. Just make sure your paperwork's as tight as mine. Brunch resumed after that. Sort of. Conversation drifted back in shallow bursts. The food was still delicious, the mimosas still bubbly, but the room had changed. The center of gravity had shifted. I didn't need applause. I needed alignment, and that was already in motion. As I gathered my things to leave, Tessa approached. I want to talk, she said. Her voice was low. I'm listening, I replied. I didn't know you were going to... You didn't ask, I interrupted. She stared at me. For what it's worth, she said after a long pause, you're good at this. I know, she stepped back. I'm not going to fight you. I'm not here to fight, I said. I'm here to fix. As I walked out the front door, Vanessa caught up to me. You handled that like a lawyer, she said. Like someone who's been ignored long enough, I said. She smiled. About damn time. I stepped out into the sunlight. The air smelled cleaner somehow. Not sweeter, just lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of pretending. I was just me, publicly, fully, without apology. The brunch table didn't break because I flipped it. It broke because the truth finally sat down at the head, and she wasn't leaving. By Monday morning, the story had legs. Not because I told it, but because I didn't. I didn't give a statement. I didn't release a memo. I didn't call a journalist or hold a press conference in front of some brick and ivy building. I simply posted a photo, 8:42 a.m. Instagram, my personal account. One photo, a wide-angle shot of the original Reed & Company bookstore, corner of 3rd and Main, bathed in soft morning light. Front windows clean, lights on. The old, established 1988 sign still proudly hanging. But it wasn't the storefront that told the story. It was the brass plaque affixed to the left column, barely visible in most pictures, almost never noticed. Except this one was zoomed in, framed perfectly, clear enough to read, Reed & Company. Flagship property primary stakeholder, Mary Saul A. Reed. No filter, no flourish, no caption, just a single punctuation mark beneath the image, quotation mark, a period, a full stop. By 9:30, it had been reshared 2,000 times. By noon, a Twitter thread from a publishing journalist went viral. Wait, has anyone else noticed that the person who saved Reed & Co. might not be the person they've been branding all these years? At 2:17 p.m., Seattle Weekly posted, "The Quiet Partner. What we missed about Reed & Co." Comments flooded in. Why didn't we know about her? That plaque's been there for years. This is the power move of the year. No words, just proof. Even authors and book influencers began chiming in. I've worked with Reed & Company for a decade and never met Marisol. This is wild. I thought Tessa was the founder. Turns out she was the face, not the foundation. I didn't reply to any of them. Why would I? I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was just correcting the record. Meanwhile, inside the company, things began to shift. My inbox filled with meeting requests. Requests, not demands. from people who had previously bypassed me, from executives who'd once CC'd me as a formality, from employees who now saw me, finally, as real. At 4 p.m., my phone buzzed. Robert Reed. Again. I answered this time. "Marisol," he said. "We've had 2 reporters at the office today asking about you." I waited. "I wanted to let you know we're handling it." "How?" "With honesty," he said. "For once." That surprised me. "Good," I said softly. "That's a good start." There was a pause. Then, "Your mother would have been proud of you." My throat caught for a moment, but I didn't let it show in my voice. "She always knew," I replied, "even when no one else did." He sighed. "Let's talk this week. Real talk, not PR talk." "I'd like that." For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a door creaking open. That night, I made tea, put my phone on Do Not Disturb, and reread some of the comments under the photo. There were angry ones, defensive ones, fans of Tessa who felt betrayed, unsure what to believe, but the ones that stayed with me were quieter. Simple messages like, "Thank you for reminding us that visibility isn't the same as value. This makes me feel seen. I've been the silent one in my family, too." The plaque is all the caption I needed. I closed the app, because what mattered wasn't the internet's reaction. It was that my truth now lived outside my own head, no longer buried, no longer dependent on their permission. Tuesday morning, Reed & Company issued a short internal bulletin. Effective immediately, brand messaging and public relations decisions will include oversight from majority stakeholder Marisol Reed. All legacy content is under review for accuracy. Not flashy, not headline-worthy, but it did something no gala ever had. It named me. Later that week, I received a message from Page Turn, a national literary magazine. They wanted to do a feature, The Power of the Silent Partner, a conversation with Marisol Reed. I declined the interview, but I offered a single quote, and I wrote it carefully. For years, I believed quiet contribution was enough, that showing up behind the curtain still meant I was part of the story. But erasure doesn't always come in the form of attack. It often comes dressed as gratitude that forgets your name. I didn't speak out to steal a spotlight. I spoke because no one else would point it where it always should have been. And I've learned, sometimes silence isn't dignity, it's delay. They published it on page 3, right next to a photo of that same brass plaque. Tessa didn't post anything for 5 days. When she finally did, it was a black and white photo of the 2 of us as kids, sitting cross-legged in front of a pile of books, sharing a blanket. Caption, "Families are messy, stories are messy, but facts are facts, and I respect the hell out of my sister, even when I don't deserve her forgiveness." The comment section was divided. Some praised her. Others rolled their eyes. Me? I didn't engage, because this wasn't about applause or apologies anymore. It was about something far quieter and far stronger. Recognition. The invitation arrived on thick, cream-colored cardstock, tucked inside a navy blue envelope, hand-addressed in gold ink. At first glance, it looked like every other high society event mailer, elegant, unnecessary, and begging to be ignored. But this one had a different seal. At the top, embossed in silver, was the crest of the Independent Booksellers Association of America. Beneath it, in small serif font, "To honor those who've preserved stories, not just on shelves, but in silence." And under that, keynote, Marisol Reed. I stared at it for a full minute, then read it again. This wasn't a family invitation. It wasn't Tessa's PR stunt. It wasn't damage control. This was recognition, not for being loud or charming or visible, but for doing the work, quietly, relentlessly, without applause. The event was set for Friday evening. The venue, a restored theater in the Arts District, warm lighting, velvet chairs, hushed elegance. I arrived alone, as usual. Wore navy again, powerful, grounded, not screaming for attention. At the check-in table, the young woman behind the iPad looked up. "Marisol Reed," she said, voice lifting slightly. I nodded. She stood, smiled, and extended both hands as if greeting someone sacred. "We're honored to have you." I'd heard that line before, at fundraisers, at university panels, at charity auctions. But this time, it didn't feel like a script. This time, it felt like truth finally catching up. Inside the theater, the crowd was smaller than the gala, less flashy, more focused. Publishers, bookstore owners, librarians, people who lived in language and legacy. A quiet buzz filled the air. People leafed through event programs, pointed at names, whispered about panels and guests. I found my seat in the front row. My name was printed on a placard in silver ink, Ms. Marisol Reed, keynote guest just above my name, in italics, the woman who saved more than a company. I didn't know who wrote that, but I felt it. The evening unfolded with a reverent calm. Awards were handed out, speeches given, laughter here and there, the kind that comes from people who care too much to be cynical. Then, about an hour in, the host stepped on stage. A tall woman in a slate-gray blazer, voice clear as a bell. "And now," she said, "we come to a part of the evening that doesn't need a lengthy introduction, because her work already introduced itself long before anyone knew where to look." A pause, a ripple of curiosity. "Please welcome Marisol Reed." Applause rose, not thunderous, but warm, full. I stood, walked to the podium. My heels didn't shake this time. I looked out at the audience, not family, not press, just witnesses, and I said, "I don't have a speech. I just have this. Sometimes the loudest part of your legacy is what you didn't let collapse. Thank you for noticing." Then I stepped back. Just that. No TED Talk, no backstory, no rehearsed anecdotes about childhood libraries or dusty first editions. Just truth, trimmed of pretense. The applause that followed didn't roar. It built, slowly, intentionally, like people were choosing each clap with care. When I returned to my seat, the man next to me, a bookstore owner from Vermont, leaned over and whispered, "That was exactly what needed to be said." Another leaned in from the other side. "You just said what 1,000 of us have lived." And I realized something. My silence hadn't been wasted. It had become language, and now people finally spoke it with me. After the ceremony, I lingered in the lobby, wine glass in hand. A few people came up, some to thank me, others to share their own stories. A woman in her 60s told me how her late husband had built their bookstore from scratch, and when he passed, her own family tried to take it from her. But the paperwork had my name, she said, eyes glistening, and I kept it, because I knew. I nodded. "We always know," I said, "even when they pretend we weren't there." She touched my arm gently. "You're not just fixing a brand, you're fixing something in all of us." Tessa didn't attend the event, but she sent flowers to my hotel room the next morning. A modest arrangement, lilies and eucalyptus, with a handwritten note. "You stood still, and the world finally turned toward you. I'm sorry for not turning sooner. Diyorse." I stared at the note for a long time, not because I didn't believe her, but because it no longer mattered if I did. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't something you owed. It was something you gifted yourself. That afternoon, The Independent published a photo from the event. I was walking off stage, one hand holding the edge of the podium lightly, head high, eyes soft. No smile, just peace. The caption read, "She didn't take the mic to speak, she took it to be heard." No one in my family shared it, but they all saw it. I didn't need their reposts or their approval, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't background. I was the page they couldn't skip, and the story was finally mine to tell. 3 weeks after the bookstore gala, I stood alone in the flagship store on 3rd and Main, long before it opened. The lights were off. The air still smelled of coffee beans, ink, and cedar wood. A scent I'd memorized long before I learned what equity meant. A scent from childhood, from evenings spent curled between bookshelves while the adults handled grown-up business at the register. Now the grown-up business was mine, and so was the legacy. I walked the aisles slowly, fingertips grazing the spines of novels and memoirs, noticing how the staff had arranged the new "Women Who Built It" display near the entrance. There was no plaque with my name, no spotlight, just books and people who loved them. It was enough. But today, I wasn't here to read. I was here to decide. At 9 a.m. sharp, Tessa arrived. Not late, not overdressed, not guarded. She wore flats and a gray blazer that actually looked comfortable. Her hair was pulled back. No press, no entourage, no defensive posture. Just her. We met in the small office tucked behind the non-fiction section, the same one where I'd signed the lease renewal years ago without anyone knowing. Tessa sat across from me and folded her hands. "You said you had a proposal," she said. Her tone was neutral. No performance. Just present. I took a breath. "I'm stepping back," I said. Her eyes widened. She leaned in. "What?" "I'm not walking away," I clarified, "but I'm not staying to manage day-to-day operations. It's time to pass the reins." She studied me. "You've earned the right to lead. Why give that up?" "Because leadership isn't about visibility," I said. "It's about direction. I've done what I needed to do. I've course-corrected. I've been heard. And now I want to be free." I handed her a file folder, thick and neatly labeled, Transition Strategy, Reed and Company. Inside, timelines, staffing plans, communication strategy, succession structure. At the top, recommended managing partner, Tessa Reed. She froze. "You're recommending me?" I nodded. "You know the brand. You're charismatic, you've grown the readership, and despite everything, you love this place." "But after everything I said, everything I didn't say, why would you trust me with it?" I looked her in the eye. "Because I'm not handing it to the version of you who ignored me. I'm handing it to the version sitting across from me now." She swallowed. For the first time, I saw the weight of guilt on her, not performative, but real. She'd been carrying it, quietly, just like I had once carried silence. She flipped to the last page. It was a single sheet titled Co-Founder Recognition Addendum to be displayed at all physical Reed and Company locations beginning next quarter. Her eyes scanned the lines. Then she looked up. "You want a plaque?" "No," I said. "I want the truth, in writing, in public. I don't want applause. I want record." A long pause. Then she nodded slowly. "You'll have it." That afternoon, we walked through the store together for the first time in over a decade. Staff members glanced up. A few smiled, unsure of what they were witnessing. But we didn't explain. Not everything needs explaining. We stood in front of the Founder's Wall, a decorative wooden display showing old photos of Dad, original storefronts, early team members. For years, there had been a blank space on the right. No one ever filled it. They said it was waiting for the future. I handed her the photo, a black and white image of the building deed with my signature at the bottom. Subtle, minimal, undeniable. "Frame this," I said. "Let them see what held it all up." She took it. Her hands didn't shake. 3 days later, an article appeared in the Seattle Chronicle. Behind every legacy is someone they forgot to thank, the story of Marisol Reed. This time, I didn't decline the interview, but I didn't perform either. I spoke plainly. I told the truth. I named what was erased. At the end of the piece, the journalist asked me, "What do you want your legacy to be?" And I answered, that I stayed. When I could have walked away. That I gave back, without disappearing. That I was more than the silence they mistook for weakness. A month later, I received a postcard. Just a postcard. From a woman in Arizona who ran a tiny bookstore called Dusty Chapters. The handwritten message said, I've kept my store alive through 4 recessions and a divorce. No one ever said thank you. Until you stood up and made room for the rest of us. I see you. And now I see myself too. I kept that card in my desk drawer, not for validation, but as a reminder that stories don't need volume to have value. They need truth. On a quiet morning months later, I walked into Reed & Company unannounced. The new manager, someone Tessa had trained, greeted me warmly. "Would you like to sit in the reading room, Ms. Reed?" Not the outsider, not, "Oh, we didn't know you were coming." Just Ms. Reed, that name, spoken without hesitation, not as surprise, not as footnote, just fact. I nodded, and for the first time I sat, not to watch or correct or reclaim, but simply to read. Sometimes the most powerful legacy isn't the one they celebrate, it's the one they tried to forget. Marisol didn't raise her voice. She raised the truth, and in doing so, she reminded us all, silence doesn't mean absence. If you've ever been overlooked, erased, or told your story didn't matter, know this: you don't need a stage to be real. You don't need a title to be apparent. You don't need permission to show up. And love, real love, it doesn't ask for credit. It simply stays. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And always remember, you matter, and your love leaves a mark.